Have you had enough of Brexit news, old news? Well, that makes at least two of us. I am Caterina George, Romanian writer and journalist in the UK, and today we are going to talk about one of the reasons which determined people to vote for Brexit: foreign workers taking British jobs. As you have probably guessed from my introduction, even if you're new to my channel, I am one of those foreign workers here in the UK. When I arrived in 2011, I first took a job in the care industry while I was looking for a path to achieve my goal. My aim was all along to get back to higher education and further my professional training so I could do international journalism and address an international audience. And this channel was born meanwhile. It's really helping me do what I wanted to do. But in the process, while I was working in the care industry, have I harmed employment in the UK? Have I made it worse for local workers by my presence here? As a journalist, I have always been interested in society and culture, and I like to keep updated on issues that affect all of our daily lives and well-being for all of us. Brexit is obviously one of these major issues happening not only to the UK, but also to the European Union and the whole world at this point. Because I keep informed and updated, I have come across these three main reasons to support the idea that foreign workers here in the UK are harming the local market. I've read them all across the internet and I would like to summarize them for you. These three reasons are the following. Foreign workers would be more likely to accept less pay and even sometimes under minimum wage. Foreign workers are more likely to accept worse working conditions. Foreign workers are more likely to be pushed by their employers and sometimes even to the edge of law. I'm not going to say that this doesn't happen because obviously foreign workers are more vulnerable. They come from a different culture, they come from a different country, and sometimes they don't know all their rights, they don't necessarily know what the law in this country is. But we have touched a subject that I think is absolutely vital when we talk about employees in the UK, be them foreign or local, or really the background doesn't matter. Employment law in the UK is the same for everybody, and it is employment law that will affect you as an English worker, or you as a European worker, or you as a worker from any other country in the world. Now, because of my very good skills at finding information acquired as a journalist, during my 8 years in the UK, I helped people sometimes when they were facing difficult situations at work, and not always because they were at fault. And I have to tell you, while some of them were Romanian or from a foreign background, sometimes I've noticed English people who didn't know what to do when it got difficult at work with their employer or their colleagues, because they were scared and they didn't know the law and they didn't know really where to go, ask for information and ask for help. Having researched around different types of difficult situations that people have encountered at work, I now possess a fair amount of basic knowledge about employment law in the UK. And my biggest criticism I have against it is around the fact that employees who have worked for the same company or business for under 2 years don't have a lot of security in that employment. And why I say this is because if you go on any solicitor's website here in the UK, you will find out that any case when you have worked for less than 2 years for an employer and they have just sacked you without any necessarily solid reason is very difficult to win in court. Yes, of course, the law will protect you against discrimination, harassment or bullying at your workplace, but at the same time you will have to prove that these things happened. And unless you have put in a grievance at some point, if anything like this happened at work, then you will not have much to support your case really. Maybe if you have witnesses, of course. Also, I have to point out something else that I have come across, that the law doesn't specify that people have to give notice in writing. If your contract doesn't say that your employer has to give you notice in writing, then how are you protected against the employer just saying, oh, I gave you notice 1 month ago, don't come back tomorrow? That's a little bit of a concern again. Currently in the UK though, and this is a positive thing, we have ACAS, which is a governmental body which helps to settle disputes at work, conflicts at work, whether they are caused by the employee or whether they are caused by the employer. So in cases such as if you have been discriminated against at work, if there's other very difficult conflicts that you have at work, you can always seek for advice by calling ACAS. They will tell you what to do, what your next steps are. One common thing that happens in the UK and also happens in Romania is people's fear that their situation will not get resolved and then they will have to end up in a tribunal. And that fear has a solid basis because until recently, to be more precise, in 2017, employment tribunals would cost you a lot. If you are somebody on minimum wage and if you have to pay, as it was the case with employment tribunals up to 2017, around £1,200 only for a first hearing, well, that will scare the hell out of you, wouldn't it? Now, before telling you about my experience with employment law in Romania, for comparison, I want to add just one more thing. If I have one piece of advice from having experienced different economies and societies in my life as an employee and as a person living there, is just keep records of everything that is happening and is important, because that's the only way to cover your back and to have any proof in case you will need some proof. Don't be paranoid, but keeping records will only help if need be, and also keep informed. The internet is there on your smartphone at a tap of your finger. Keep informed and don't be scared to look for information and to really protect your rights. Because after all, foreign workers, no foreign workers, Brexit, no Brexit, if we don't fight and don't protect our rights, do we truly trust politicians nowadays to do it for us? When talking about Brexit and foreign workers here in the UK, this is my main underlying thought. Is it really the fault of the foreign worker who is here to work legally if something goes wrong with their employment and they fall into a trap? Or is it the system that's been created by the laws that are the responsibility of voted British politicians here in the UK? Just give this some thought, and meanwhile, to conclude and wrap up this vlog, I will tell you about my experience in Romania when I was made redundant from possibly and probably the best job that I ever had in my career as a journalist. The company for which I was working at that time was unfortunately facing financial difficulties in the bigger context of a very unstable economy. And we had a meeting in which I was told that unfortunately they could not afford to pay me any longer and to keep my position, so they will have to make me redundant, that if they will recover from this very difficult situation, then my job will be back there available for me, because they didn't want to lose me, but it was no choice at that point. In that meeting, the director seemed very uncomfortable to do what he had to do. I was kind of heartbroken because I absolutely loved that team. I absolutely loved what we were doing together. But how is this related to employment law? Well, simply because after the meeting in which I was told I will have to be made redundant, I went home and I searched on my computer about employment law around redundancy and other aspects of how a job can end in Romania. One of the very common practices in Romania with employers at that time was that whatever the discussion was between you as an employee and them as an employer, they kind of expected you to give notice yourself. It was very common practice, and I'm not sure why, but it might have been the reason why I did all of this research. And I was right to do so, because next day I went to work and the person who was in charge with HR called me to their office and said, well, if you could fill in your notice and yeah, then we can finalize the process. But having researched online the previous night, I knew if I gave notice, I would have lost all of my rights that I had as a person who was made redundant. What I also found out online was that solicitors said that 80% of cases where employees in Romania were filing a case against their employer, the employee would win. However, they also said that most people feared going to court because they didn't know that the law was supporting them and that they would have a chance to win against their employer. So when the HR person with this employer told me, well, if you would just give us notice, I said, I'm not giving notice, I was made redundant. It's not my choice. I will stay here if it is my choice. And then he was all confused and embarrassed and said, oh, maybe I misunderstood, so let me call the director because he's not in today. And I said, look, tell him that this is what the law says. I am not giving notice. You will have to give me the paperwork to testify that I was being made redundant. Now this personal story of mine feels just so bittersweet to me, because while I felt stronger by learning something, at the same time, the company was still in trouble and couldn't afford my job. But then I hope that this video can inspire somebody if they do face difficulties at work. And if you know anybody whom this vlog can help, please share it with them. And hopefully it can provide some insight and some inspiration. Also remember to subscribe to my channel. Until next time then, ciao for now.